All right, so this is going to be my review of episode 3 of Uzumaki. And I really didn't want to do this. And not, I didn't want to do this like record a video, upload it to YouTube. I didn't want to do this because I felt like I almost let social media influence how I went into this episode. So if you've been keeping up with Uzumaki, whether it be on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, you know there's been a lot of discussion about the overall production and overall quality of the episode since the first one down into the third one. So, I went into a deep dive. I'm like, what are people talking about? Because I feel like I actually enjoyed the second episode. I did notice like some things that were kind of like, okay. Like as far as like the main thing that people are talking about is like when the two lovers were running on the beach and their dads were chasing after them, like they obviously dropped the quality in that specific spot. But I feel like I overall still enjoyed the episode to where like I didn't really hyper focus on like quality. I'm still enjoying the story. I feel like they were still doing pretty good. But I feel like this, like after reading into it and like learning that the producer got kicked off and like they outsourced, episodes to different studios and like it was just no longer about the story of Uzumaki. It was more so about, do we take a loss? And also this being in production for 5 years, correct me if I'm wrong, but this being in production for 5 years is also just crazy learning. So like I'm taking in all this information. So I'm going into this third episode super critical. I'm like going into it. I'm like looking at everything. And I agree. I really didn't want to go into it hate watching something because I really hate when people do that. Because I feel like all animes across the board, whether it be like some of my favorites like Berserk, One Piece, Bleach, Naruto, other things like One Punch Man, like every anime is guilty of dropping the quality of something at some point in the anime, whether it be like background characters literally just being stick figures, just being blurs, just being circles and rectangles. Like every anime is guilty of doing that. So I was like, I don't know why people are freaking out. Like that running on the beach scene, like, yeah, that was kind of like a drop in quality, but I feel like the episode overall was kind of like just being a casual watcher. I didn't necessarily like watch the second episode of Uzumaki and say, damn, that was terrible. Like I was still like, oh, okay. Like they're still building up the story. They're still trying to, figure out what's going on in this little town. But bro, this third episode, I couldn't avoid it. Absolutely unavoidable. First of all, I went back and rewatched the first episode just to see if like people were just blowing the first episode out of proportion. Like sometimes people give things too much credit. So after I finished watching the third episode, I went back and watched the first episode and I was like, yeah, that was night and day. It is completely night and day. The production, the storytelling, bro. And like, if you've watched my past 2 reviews, something that I really harped on was like the sound design. Like again, that first episode with his dad's eyes and like when he was contorting his body to get in the box, or like, just the overall sound in the first episode made you feel like you were watching something that was horror, that was supposed to be scary, that was supposed to make you cringe up, that was supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. Second episode, it was still kind of there. Like it was still like, oh, this is kind of creepy. This is still kind of like awkward. I don't really feel like it still made me feel kind of like, ugh. But like going into this third episode after, going into the Twitter rants, going into the TikTok rants, I just noticed like the sound quality it just wasn't there. Like I think the biggest thing with this episode was like the mosquito sound buzzing. And like that was actually like a pretty good sound. Like it made me feel like it actually made me feel like cringing up. But overall across the board, like the sound choices and design for this episode just wasn't good to me in my opinion. I didn't feel like I was watching anything horror related. And I'll tell you the worst part of this episode, and it's towards the very end. The worst part of this episode when it came to sound and it's supposed to evoke an emotion out of you, when his body turned into a spring at the end and he's screaming and like, I think it's like I thought it was his intestines that was like the coil, but like it was just awful, bro. I was like, this is supposed to be freaky. This is supposed to be creepy. This is supposed to be weird. And like the sound that they decided to use for a scream, the voice actor, like the sound they decided to use for the scream, the spring, the body parts falling on the ground. It was just like, oh, like at that point, although it was the end, I was like, all right, turn this off. I don't care anymore. Which is very unfortunate. Another thing that really just stood out to me was just like, I feel like there were too many plots they were trying to get to in this episode. the mothers in the hospital. They were trying to get through that. And I feel like, Suchi's mom dying, which that should be a bigger thing. She died and all we saw was him looking at a picture of her. And I thought they were stopping the furnace thing and cremating bodies, but clearly they cremated her body. And then, Kitty's family and like the things that they're going through. And then like this weird dude that's like behind the walls and he's like madly in love with her. And then like the typhoon is like madly in love with her. I feel like nothing was able to get expanded on. Nothing was able to like get, fleshed out fully. Like I feel like there was just like, we were jumping like so fast. And like, given that I haven't read Uzumaki, I don't know how many chapters or how many pages they are covering, in the book with each episode, but I feel like they jumped through a lot of things without fully explaining anything this entire episode. Like, I don't know. There were like 3 major points where I feel like the quality of the animation was just like garbage, like Gerbant, like just terrible. There was a scene where all the patients were coming out the room because they heard the screams of the dude that got his blood sucked out of his body completely. And like this dude comes out the door and like it's a wall, but he steps away from the wall and he puts his hand there as if there's a pole. And I was just like, there was no need to even make that. He could have just stood there, but they went the extra mile to make him hold his hand up like this as if he was leaning against a pole or if he was on the wall, which he's clearly not in this video. And I was just like, okay. And then when Kitty had fell to the floor after she saw the lady sucking the blood out of a patient and she's crawling away, like the CGI on that part was like really bad to me. I just really did not enjoy that. And then when the mushroom started sprouting everywhere and the doctor had came out the room and, Suchi and Kitty, they went into the room and she like was supposed to, it like a scene out of The Exorcist. And like, she's like, oh, I need the blood. And like, that's supposed to feel, I feel like out of everything in this episode, that moment should have had the most incredible sound design, the most incredible production, the most incredible animation. Like they should have dumped a lot more time into that just because that is supposed to be, it should have been more than what it was. I didn't feel anything towards it. I actually like wanted to laugh because I was like, that looks terrible. Especially if you, like, I don't know if it is paying homage to The Exorcist, but I feel like if you're going to play off of that, like, you should have played it all the way up. So, yeah, man, this episode is very disappointing. Very disappointing. I was not thrilled to watch this episode like other ones, like episode 1 and 2. Like, I actually enjoyed those episodes. I actually feel like they were, like, getting somewhere. But clearly, as people were talking about on Twitter and also just in other different, areas of social media, like, it's clear what happened. Like somebody screwed over the director, I believe. And then, they started outsourcing to too many different studios to get the thing done. They were trying to, they didn't want to take a loss by just scrapping the project completely. And they just let it turn to what it is now. So it's very unfortunate what happened to Uzumaki. But I do plan to still watch the last episode. I do still plan to read it after the anime is completed just to see like, what they missed. Because I'm sure like in many cases, being somebody who's read Tokyo Ghoul, who's had a terrible anime adaptation, given I've read a Berserk up until like the latest chapter that has had terrible animations, like those two are like the greatest examples of animes that have horrible anime adaptations, but the story is so good. Like I've read Tokyo Ghoul in full, but I read Tokyo Ghoul in full with the physical copies, and I have some physical copies of Berserk, and those stories are just amazing. I don't even want to bother watching another anime adaptation of Tokyo Ghoul or Berserk just because like I don't want to ruin it. So that's why I feel like I waited to read Uzumaki until this was over, just to make up, just in case that they did bad. I didn't want to read it, then go in with like this mindset of like, okay, let me see how they do. I wanted to watch something where I didn't know anything about it and then read it after. So yeah, I don't know. It's disappointing to see what it's turned into, given that the first episode is really good. Episode 1, phenomenal. Episode 2, although it's not a 10 out of 10 like episode 1, it's still like a solid 8. But episode 3, I could care less about episode 3, and I'm really scared to see what the next episode looks like, because clearly it's turned into this. But let me know in the comments what you think of episode 3. Also, if you have any extra information about what the whole story is about, what happened with the production team or the director and everything, drop a comment. But yeah, terrible.